Hello, welcome back to Classical Greek Latin. My name is Josh. I'm the teacher for this course. This is Greek lesson number 2, an introduction to syllables and accents. If you haven't watched the video before this, you'll want to go back and watch that first before starting this video. And then all lessons have a corresponding supplement or expansion lesson on Patreon. And there's a link for Patreon in the About section on this channel, and also in the description beneath this video. So you'll want to go check that out. It's $10 a month, and that will provide you with further explanation on the lessons and also help with the homework exercises, which I'll talk a little bit more about at the end of this lesson. So with that in mind, if you do find these videos helpful, please be sure to like, subscribe, share, and leave any questions, comments, or suggestions in the comment section below, and I'll try to get back to those as I can. So thank you for that. And let's get started. Before we jump into today's lesson, I just want to go back and refresh you on what we talked about last time. So we talked about the alphabet. We talked a lot about how the sounds are made. We talked about labials, palatals, and dentals. And if you remember this picture here, we talked about the different places in the mouth these sounds were made. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about that, and you'll begin to see why seeing that cross-section of the human vocal tract is important and just making it easier to understand how these letters function. All right, so let's go ahead and go to Roman numeral page 24 first, and that is going to be right here. So we have Roman numeral 24. And this is where we were at last week with this lesson last week, but I want to talk about liquids, sibilants, and double consonants. So those are going to be right through here under section D. So consonants are commonly classified as follows: mutes, labials, and then you have P, beta, phi, gutturals. We didn't talk about gutturals, or palatals. I lumped those two together as palatals. So you have kappa, gamma, and chi. Chi would be the guttural there, right? And then you have dental or lingual, the tau, delta, and then theta. So liquids here, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. Basically, a liquid is going to be, I would say, a lambda or a rho. They classify mu and nu as liquids. I would just call those nasals. And I will explain to you in just a second here. Let me grab a pencil. So if you have the liquid, if you think about a liquid just basically means not solid, right? So if you have the lambda, the top of your tongue is going to be up in this region, but it's not making real solid contact with the teeth or the hard palate up here at all. So it's considered a liquid because it's just it's floating out there. Same thing with a rho. Rho is in a very similar position up here towards the top, front of the roof of the mouth, but it's not making solid connection with any part there. And that's often why those two letters are easy to confuse with each other. In English, they're L and R. In Greek, they're lambda and rho. All right, the mu and nu, I call those nasals because the mu you make on the lips, but the lips are sealed. So the only way for the sound from your vocal cords to come out is to go through the nasal cavity up here. And that's why we refer to those as nasal, because the lips are sealed to make mu, and then the sound comes out through the nose, right? Nasus, nasal. Same thing with the nu. The tip of the tongue is going to seal off the front of the mouth, but behind the teeth. Nu, right? So the air is being pushed out through the nose, smaller resonating chamber because it's sealed off right here. So you get the distinction between the mu and the nu, even though it's a subtle distinction. Not terribly important, these terms, but yeah. So I would say that the lambda is a liquid and the rho is a liquid, and mu and nu are nasals because they're produced with the nasus, that is the nose. All right, sibilants. The word sibilant, so liquid means liquid. means not solid, basically. I'm going to explain that. But sibilant just means, literally, it means hissing. And that's pretty self-explanatory here. If you know your Greek letters by now, you have sigma, right? So hissing sound. So it's a sibilant, or it's a hisser, right? Double consonants, zeta, xi, and psi. This is not terribly important. I wouldn't get hung up on this. Just recognize this is zeta, xi, and psi, right? But that's what they're calling double consonants. We probably won't talk about that ever again, so just recognize the letters and you will be fine. All right, let's go to page 25 now, and let's look at what we call diphthongs. So diphthongs are pretty common, very simple concept here. And you have the root of, you have 8 diphthongs basically. You don't have to remember that number, but you have diphthongs that are rooted with the iota, like here, 4 with the iota, and then 4 with the upsilon. Okay? So diphthongs are always long in quantity because it makes sense. You have 2 sounds instead of just 1 sound, right? So it's going to take twice as long to produce that sound. All right, so you have, let's just pronounce these real quick. You have an alpha with iota, so it's going to be pronounced I. If you've taken voice lessons, you probably are familiar with this concept already, because you can't, your tongue is in different places to say ah and then e. So if you're prolonging, dragging out that, like in singing, you can only say one letter at a time, but you say it so quickly, in a diphthong, it sounds like a single letter, right? So you have I, ah, e, I, okay, like an aisle. Then you have a, e, a, as in freight, okay? Then you have oi, o, e, as in toil, okay? Then you have u, e, as in we. Now if you think of this, we have, in English alphabet, we have U, and then we have double U. So double U is another form of U, but we don't usually think of it that way. So just pronounce this like we. So you have U, E, we. Okay. Now moving on to the upsilon-based diphthongs, we have A, U, Au, as in cow. You have epsilon, E, U, O, O. Okay, and you have eta upsilon, Eu, Eu, and you see the short sign here, the upside down curve there for E, and then you have the long mark, the macron, for the U, okay, Eu. And then you have here, this is O and U, but you're just going to pronounce it as U, as in group. Okay. All right. So I would recommend going through these here and just reading those as practice later on tonight, or whatever time of day it is for you. But we'll go on to the next section. So when a long vowel combines with a iota, it forms an improper diphthong. So these are all diphthongs, right? So it just means 2 letters basically. So improper diphthong, when it combines with a long vowel like eta or omega, right? The iota no longer affecting the sound. So iota and then a long vowel like eta or omega. So we have those down here, right? Eta, eta, omega, omega. So when you have eta or omega combined with the iota, you get an improper diphthong. If the vowel to which it is attached is a capital, the iota is placed on the same line. You'll almost never see a capital like this, right? What you'll most commonly see is the eta with a little iota underneath, if you can see that, and then you have an omega with a little iota underneath, right? And so the iota here is just not pronounced. It's the sound is so insignificant, you would just pronounce this as a, just a regular eta. or just a regular O for omega. All right. So again, the technical language is not so important, but just be familiar that that's what these are. These are improper diphthongs. You will see these in declensions mostly, and we'll talk about that when we come to it. But you will see those eventually. All right. So let's go on to Roman numeral 3 here for breathing. Okay, so breath marks here, you can read this paragraph here on your own. Let me get a piece of paper here. The important takeaway here is going to be your breathing marks, right? So you have rough breathing, and then you have smooth breathing. And all that means is when you have, at the beginning of a word, you're going to have, let's see if I can get an example here. Okay, so they have Hades as an example. So they have Hades. All right. So there you go. So you can see that. So you have Hades. So you notice this little mark right here. The larger version of that is it just looks like a C. But what that tells you is it's so in English we would write it out like this, right? With that H on the front. In Greek, you don't do that. You're just going to mark the breathing on top of the letter like so, okay? And then if you would have, so that's rough breathing, right? So that's rough. Or, yeah, so it has air behind it. Omicron, we'll just use this for an example. Omicron. Omicron. All right, so you have Omicron here, and this is going to be a smooth breathing, so it's a backward C, right? And that just means it's not Omicron, it's Omicron. Omicron, Omicron. Right, so pretty simple concept, rough breathing here with breath, and then smooth breathing, no breath. And of course, you're only going to see these on vowels, right? And also over the letter ro, right? The letter ro here at the beginning of a word will always have a rough breathing over it. We'll always have breath with it. All right. All right, let's talk about when you have consonants that combine. So let's look at section D. Okay. So section D here, we're still under Roman numeral 3, under breathing. This is a pretty simple concept also. If you think about it, so you have letters that are going to change. So you have, let's get this here, you have, these are consonants, so you have P, and then you have beta, right? So when those are combined with a theta, you're going to get a phi. Okay? So what I mean by combined is if you have a P in the spelling of a word, for example, and then it's followed by theta, it's going to do this. All right. So you have, now this is where it's, the places in the mouth are important to remember. These are labials, P, because make that sound on the lips. It's a labial. Beta, make that sound on the lips. It's a labial. And phi, you make that sound on your lips, right? You bring your top teeth to your lower lip, and you have phi. So these are all labials. The thing with theta is a dental, but what's changing here, making the change on our labials, is the breath. So theta's got to keep the breath in it, because you can't change it to t, that would change it to tau, right? So it's got to say a theta, but this letter being so close to that breath, in theta, the blowing through the tongue and between the tongue and the teeth there, it's going to change that labial, that breathless labial, into a breathed labial, right? So that's, in any language, people do this for ease of pronunciation because it would be extremely awkward to try to keep that P as a voiceless labial without breath next to that aspirant, that breathed theta, right? So it's easier just to change that labial here to a breathed labial, which is phi, okay? So we have P beta plus theta equals phi, and that's what that means, right? So if you were to just write this out to be redundant, you have beta next to a theta also becomes a phi, okay? So I think you get the concept, but we'll go ahead and repeat the concept here. So if we have kappa or gamma, if you think for a moment, I'll let you think here, where those are pronounced in the mouth, okay, plus a theta. All right, so those are palatals, okay? So those are pronounced right here. The back of your tongue comes up to the roof of your mouth there, and those are palatals. Kappa, gamma, right? So they're both palatals. So it's going to turn into a palatal. I called it a guttural a little earlier in this lesson. For the first time I called it that, but for the sake of argument, we'll call it a palatal. And that is going to be the Greek chi. All right, so again, you have your kappa here, your gamma here, and your chi is going to be there. So the essence of the letter is staying the same, but what we're doing is we're adding the breath of that theta, right? So just like we did up here, so we have a palatal, kappa, voiceless palatal, next to a theta is going to give us that, okay? So the breath of the theta is influencing the kappa to change to a chi, right? But it's still maintaining its essential position in the mouth. It just has air in it now. So we represent that now, that new sound with chi instead of kappa, okay? And it's probably no accident that the kappa and the chi actually have a similar shape to them, but I digress. Okay, so let's do this with gamma. We have gamma and a theta next to each other. Is also going to become a chi and theta. So the theta remains the same. The theta can't change, so it's going to stay the same. And I know I'm just using two-letter examples here, but you will see this all the time in Greek words when we get further down into the grammar. All right? So let's do the dentals now. So the dentals, if you remember, going to be tau, and then you're going to be, what's the other dental? Delta, right? And then you're going to have plus theta is going to lead to what? Tau, delta, tau or delta plus a theta is going to give us another theta, okay? So again, in the mouth, you have the tau is up here, tip of the tongue comes behind the top teeth, delta, tip of the tongue comes behind the top teeth, and theta, the tip of the tongue comes behind the top teeth. And again, you have tau, voiceless, dental, delta, voiced, dental, right? Voice means the vocal cords are vibrating, voiceless means they're not. Theta is aspirated, it has a breath like we've been talking about. So when you take a tau here and a theta here, and you're trying to say them so close together and trying to get breath into that theta, that tau or that delta is going to adopt that breath as well and be transformed into a theta there. So when you have this arrangement in a word, it is going to become this. You're going to have a double theta, right? Where you have a delta with a theta, it's going to become a double theta. Yeah, handwriting doesn't look so great, but you get the point. All right. Now let's go on and talk about labials and palatals, what happens to them when they are put next to a theta. So let me see here. So that's going to be section or page 26. So we got to turn the page here. All right, page 26. Let's see where we're at. All right, so letter E. When in inflection, a voiced or voiceless labial or palatal immediately precedes the aspirate theta of the ending, it is roughened to its corresponding aspirate. Okay, and that's what we talked about. All right. So, yeah, that's what we talked about here. We just covered all that. So that was section E under Roman numeral 3. And we're at the page 20, Roman numeral 26. Okay. So, number 4, syllables. Okay. Syllable, the word syllable, it's important to understand these terms in plain English because otherwise they just sound like they're magical terms and have no logic to them. Syllable is a Latin word. Get my pencil here. Comes from sun. The N in sun turns to an L because it comes before another L. Excuse me, this is Greek, not Latin. Sun is Greek. Sun, the N there has changed to an L. That's why you have a double L. And then lab means to take, it comes from lambano, but here's a shortened verb, lab. It means to take together, to put together. So basically a syllable is going to be any consonant combined with a vowel, right? And if you think about it, you can't pronounce a consonant without a vowel. I can't think of an instance where that is possible, okay? All right, so every Greek word has as many syllables as it has vowels or diphthongs. There are no silent letters other than iota subscript. Okay, that's just clarifying. In English, we have a lot of E's on the end of words, for example, that we don't pronounce. In Greek, you pronounce everything. All right. Let me see here. So we have, so getting into accents, we have 3 places for accents, and this is where it gets a little confusing. So let's see here. All right, let me get another piece of paper here. And we will use the word anthropos as our sample word here. All right, so we have anthropos. Put our smooth breathing there, anthropos, not hanthropos, anthropos. So we have smooth breathing mark. And then I'm going to accent it there because I memorized where that accent goes. And also, as we move on, you can see how I reason to put the accent there. Okay, so you have, again, we're going to use the magic words. We have the ultima. We have, and now these are, let's break this into syllables. We're talking about syllables and we're labeling the syllables, okay? So we have, let me get a different color here. So we have the an, and we have the thropos. So we have 3 syllables, 1, 2, 3, okay? So this is going to be the ultima, or the ultimate, that is the last, right? So the last syllable, right? We have the beginning of the word here, and then we have the last syllable, the beginning syllable, and the last one. Okay, then you have the penult, which just means before the last. Pain, ult, before the last. Okay, and then you have the ante penult, the before the last syllable. So I'm convinced that grammarians understand that language can be so simple sometimes they have to invent these complicated words to make themselves feel smart. But yeah, ultima, last syllable. Penult, before the last. And then ante means before. So before the second or before the last syllable, right? So you could say third to last, second to last, and last if you like. Okay. Now those last three syllables of a word are going to be crucial in understanding accents. An accent is never going to move closer to more forward to the beginning of a word. So this particular word, anthropos, which means man, anthropology, right? This particular word only has three syllables. Many words will have more syllables than that, but the accent will never move closer to the front of the word any closer than three syllables from the end. So we have 1, 2, 3 syllables from the end of the word, right? So the accent will always be on that third to last or second to last or very last syllable. All right. So talked about that. Let's see here. So that was section B. All right. So section B, the final syllable is called the ultima. Syllable preceding the ultima is called the penult. The syllable preceding the penult is called the antepenult. Okay, so C. In dividing words into syllables, place with the following vowel or diphthong a single consonant or such combinations of consonants as can be pronounced together at the beginning of a word. So we have astron, which means star. As a side note, this is connected to aster, which has the meaning of flame or fire to it. So that's very cool. Then you have pipto here, which means it. This is actually first person singular. I don't want to drown you with information here. In Latin, typically they will give you the infinitive as the demonstration word. This is a verb. Pipto means to fall. But this is actually first person, so it means literally this means I fall. But we'll just read it as to fall because it's just an example. So we have pipto, and then we have deknumi, which means to point out or to show, to illustrate something, to shine light on it. Deknumi. Okay, so let's see here. And then you have, okay, but compound words, the first element of which is a preposition, or dus, are divided at the point of union. Okay, let's talk about these first three words first: astron, pipto, deknumi, and then we will talk about these compound words here, paren and dus poros. Okay, so let me write out some examples here with that. Let's just show you how they break up the words here. Astron, I'm going to change it a little bit. So you have the word astron, which means star. Astron, and we're going to put our smooth breathing. No breath over that introduction vowel. So just astron, not hastron. So astron, and then you're going to put your accent right there. Okay, and then they divide it here. Let's see here. Astron. Yeah, that is a good place to divide it. So we will stick with that. And that has to do with the sigma being a sibilant, a hissing consonant. Goes well with a T, so we're going to keep those together. Breaking up syllables really has a lot to do with just ease of pronunciation. If we look at pipto, now this one I am going to change a little bit. So we have pipto, which means to fall or I fall, and they're marking this iota as long. Okay, there's a lot to talk about in this, which is good because it'll help us out. So they break up this word right here between the iota and that second P. I'm going to advocate breaking it up right there, just because putting that labial P right and trying to pronounce it with that T together is very difficult. But if you pronounce it as peep, toe versus P and then pto, you could argue that the Greeks were used to finagling words like that, but we're English speakers, so we're going to go peep and then toe. But then also something here to keep in mind is that because this vowel has a consonant on either side, right? So you can see here, these are two consonants together. There's no vowel between them, right? So a syllable taking together, right? That's what sun labe or sun lambano is what that means, to take together. It is a consonant taken together with a vowel, right? So we have the toe has its vowel, the omega, right? Omega is always long, okay? Don't try to memorize everything that this is not a systematic explanation. This is kind of just a holistic, comprehensive explanation of this particular word. I'm trying to convey some concepts here. So omega is naturally long. Any consonant only needs one vowel to make a syllable with. So toe, we have a complete syllable there here. Putting this P with this syllable as peep makes more sense phonetically. And also when you have a vowel coupled with two consonants like that, it's typically going to be long because it takes longer to pronounce peep than it would to say P. So if we were to put, say, an epsilon in here, this is not a real word, I'm making this up, but if we were to put an epsilon there, it would be pipeto. So this would probably be a short iota at that point, right? Does that make sense? I'm going to scribble this out in a second. So if we were to have an epsilon there, then that P, this second P would need to go with that epsilon, right? Because we can't just have that vowel hanging out by itself there. All right, so we'd have P, pepto. This is not a real word. So this is what we have, right? We have peepto. So I hope this makes sense. If you have questions about this, you can put those in the comments, and I will try to get to those. All right. So we have peepto, which means I fall, to fall. Right. You know, you'll get vocabulary as we go on. Don't stress about memorizing these words just right now. Okay. And then what is our other word that we're looking at here? Deiknumi. All right. So deiknumi is a nice example word here because we have some diphthongs. Okay, now they separate this word here, de, and then canoe, and then me. I am going to separate this word here, like this. If you can see that, my apologies. All right. So you have deiknumi here. We have our accent there. And what else do we have? We have a long mark here. And that's good. Deiknumi. Okay? All right. So let's go down to parein. So these words here, astron means star. Pipto, verb, means I fall, to fall. Deiknumi means I show or I point out, or to point out, to show, right? Very straightforward words. These next words are compound words, right? So we have parein. Let me get this up so you can see it. We have parein, which is going to have a circumflex here. And I'm going to talk about, there are 3 accents, and I'll talk about those immediately after this here, so don't worry about that. So this is a compound word. So par means nearby, par for the course. You've heard this in golf. That means what's expected, right? You're close to the expectation, par. Par means, it comes from para. The full spelling of it looks like this. So you have para, the shortened version, that alpha drops off for a compound, and then you have par. Ein means I was, right? It's the imperfect of I am, eini. So I was nearby is what this word means. All right, and so what are we saying here? So, but compound words, the first element of which is a preposition, right? Par. You could say the English equivalent with that would be by, right? Nearby. Compound words, the first element, which is a preposition, are divided at the point of union. Okay, so that's what the point they're making here. These are two separate words that are joined together right there. Okay? And so they're treated as such. The other example they have here is a particular example with dus. Dus is a negator. It means like it undoes a good sense. Like it, let's see here. It's like undo something, like a mishap or something like that. Like in English, dus does that in Greek. All right. So the example they give us here is dus poros. All right. I'm gonna follow. All right, they've got good syllable breakups here, so we're going to follow that. Notice I use the final form sigma there. So dus, regular sigma, and then final form sigma. Dus poros. Right, so they separate it there. Dus is like the English on or miss. It gives a negative connotation to it. It reverses the meaning of the word. Poros here means like a passageway. So they break up the syllables, two syllables here, poros. So this is one word. Poros means like passage, and then dus is basically the negator. It makes it not so. So this word means basically impassable, right? Or cannot be passed through or something like that. But we're breaking it up between the preposition here and then the main word. And then the main word here happens to have two syllables, so we break those up also. So this whole word has three syllables: the ultima, the penult, and then the ante penult, or the last, second to last, third to last. This particular word only has two syllables, so there is no ante penult. There's only the ultima and the penult, or the last and the second to last, right? Parein and dus poros. Let's talk about the accents a little bit here. Just to be clear. So there are only three accents. You have an acute accent, which I'm just going to use the letter alpha as our demonstrator here. So acute, the word acute means to sharpen, right? To go up, you could say. So this is acute, right? And then we'll use another alpha, so demonstrator. Then we have a grav, right? Grav means heavy, right? This is a grav. It means heavy, a gravity, grave, grav. It's going down, from up to down, right? And then you have a circumflex. The circumflex. Now I'm going to use a diphthong here to demonstrate we need a long vowel here to have a circumflex. So we have a circumflex looks like that, right? Circumflex. A key to understanding Greek accent is to understand that in antiquity, these marks, acute, grav, and circumflex, represented tone. So there was a change in pitch that on this particular syllable, the tone would go up, it would rise, and then would come back down to the next, on the next syllable, whatever it was, back to, so you have da 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 da. It comes back, right? Here you have a dropping tone, so you have da 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 da, and then we come back to da 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 da. Right? You can make sense of my haphazard singing there. Circumflex basically is like an acute and a grav joined together. So the tone, and this is why you need a always, a circumflex will always be on a long. Okay, and we'll talk about long and short in a second here also. But you need a long syllable for a circumflex to have enough time to go up and then come back down on its tone, right? So you have your tone here in the word, and then it goes up, And rather than coming back down to that tone on the next syllable, it does all that in this syllable, say I, this diphthong of I. So it's going to go up and then come back down and then continue on. And for that to happen, the circumflex is a natural long marker, right? In modern Greek text, like I've said before, if let's say you have an iota, you'll have a long marker over it like that, right? You don't, the circumflex tells you something is long because you know it has to be a long vowel for that circumflex to express itself fully. Okay, let's talk about something else here, mores, right? So amore, it means portion, okay? Now, Crosby Schaeffer does not mention this, but this is a very useful tool in understanding why accents go where they go. Let's use our example anthropos again. Okay. Okay. So anthropos. Amore is, say, a unit of measurement, of measuring time, of duration, right? So a syllable will have either one more or it will have two mores. Okay? So if it's short, like this omicron here, it's going to have one, right? And more, I believe it's spelled like more, but with accent on the end, more. All right, so you have one more here. It's a short omicron. Okay, then you have a long omega, right? Mega, micron, big, little. So this is going to have two mores. Okay, so you could say it takes twice as long to pronounce as omega as it does it half the time to pronounce as omicron. So therefore, there's one portion for omicron and two portions for omega. Okay, and then short alpha here, it is a one more also, or one portion. Again, let us not lose ourselves in the magic words here. More just means portion or lot. Okay, it's your assigned portion, right? If you're cutting up a pizza, you get your portion of the pizza, or you get your more of the pizza, right? In this instance, so there's a syllable will only have one more or two mores, and there's nothing else to it than that. You're never going to have a syllable with three mores or anything like that. It's always just one or two mores. Okay, so when you have, say, if you were to try to put it a circumflex, so a circumflex has an acute and a grave, so the tone goes up and then it comes back down. Well, you need two portions of the vowel to make that happen, right? This is incorrect. We'll just pretend the rest of this word is not here. If I were to put a circumflex over, let's cross this out. I don't want to confuse you for later. If we were just look at the circumflex over this omega, we know the omega is long because it's omega. It's big, mega, right? Not like a megaphone, right? So we know that it's going to have two portions or two mores, which is good because now we can account for the acute and the grave tied up in that circumflex, right? Now, if we were to try to take that circumflex and put it over this omicron, that would be impossible because this omicron is short. It's always short, right? So we need two portions for the two tones, the up and then the down tone, but we only have one. So a circumflex over a short vowel is impossible. The only thing we can do with this omicron is either put an acute on it or put a grave on it, because we only have one portion of time to pronounce that omicron. Okay, I hope that makes sense to you, but I have found the idea of amore, the portion per syllable, to be extremely helpful in understanding accents, which otherwise can seem convoluted at times. All right. Let's look now at, go to page 26. We're still there. But let's look at page, or section 5. So accents. Okay. So let's just read this here. We are on Roman numeral 26 up here, and we're in section 5, accents. A knowledge of quantity is essential in determining accents. So we just talked about quantity, right? That's the more, the portions, the length, long versus short, okay? The quantity is essential in determining accent. A syllable is long by nature when it has a long vowel or diphthong, right? So 7 vowels in Greek, 2 of those vowels are naturally long or always long, right? They're inherently long, and that would be eta and omega, right? So a syllable is long by nature when it has a long vowel or a diphthong, okay? So diphthong, well, here's our eta and omega just for visual reference. Those are 2 naturally long vowels. They're always long. They can never be short, okay? A diphthong is just when you put 2 vowels together, right? Let me go back to this other page here. If you remember, those are our diphthong page, right? So you have alpha, iota, 2 vowels. It's a diphthong. So each of those by themselves, alpha is short, iota is short, but you put them together and now you have a double short that's long, right? So any diphthong, any double vowel is going to be long, right? Because it takes twice as long to pronounce it. All right? So the vowels eta and omega are always long, okay? Just take mental note of this. Epsilon and omicron are always short, okay? And you could explain that by they have corresponding vowels that are long for them. So epsilon corresponds to eta, and omicron corresponds to omega, right? So therefore, because they have long representations of themselves in other letters, eta, omega, the epsilon, omicron can just chill and be short all the time, right? They're always short. The others are sometimes short, sometimes long. Okay, what are the others he's talking about? He's talking about alpha, iota, and upsilon. Okay, I'll write that out just so you can see. So the other ones that are sometimes long, sometimes short, let's put them in order. Alpha, iota, and upsilon. Okay, those are short or long, depending on context. And in modern Greek, they will mark it with, if it's short, they'll just leave it like that. If it's long, they'll put a macron over the top of it so that you know. Okay. All right. So you have alpha, iota, upsilon, can be short or long. Epsilon and omicron are always short. Eta, omega are always long. Okay. And then we have all 7 of our vowels accounted for, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They're all there. All right. So alpha, iota, upsilon are sometimes short, sometimes long. And the diphthongs, I and oi, this is a little confusing, but don't let it scare you. It's actually fairly simple. The diphthongs, alpha, iota, and omicron, iota, when final, I'm going to skip the optative part here, are regarded as short in determining accents. Okay, so alpha, iota, when it's at the end of a word, is considered short. Okay, when omicron, iota is at the end of a word, it is considered short. That is counterintuitive because these are double vowels and it takes twice as long to pronounce them. But in Greek, the accent system treats them as short. And when we get a little further ahead, you'll see what I mean by treating as short or treating as long and why that's significant and where you place the accent on the last syllable, second to last, or third to last syllable. Okay, so alpha, iota are short, omicron, iota are short only at the end of a word. And then they give you this exception, except in the optative, which is a verbal form, which we won't get to for many chapters from now. And then in the one word, oikoi, okay, which is plural for houses. Oikos, oikoi, okay. All right, let's see here. If you have questions about that, feel free to type those in the comments below, and I will try to clarify that for you. Okay. All right. So we talked about B. There are three accents: acute, grave, and circumflex. They do not affect the pronunciation. What they mean is, we talked about this in the first lesson. Is a vowel is always pronounced. Alpha is always alpha. It's not in English like ah, a, right? It's always just ah. So every vowel is always going to be pronounced exactly the same. The accents, the length changes the quantity, the time that's pronounced, and not the quality, the actual vowel itself. They do not affect the pronunciation, but they obey very strict laws that are at times the sole means of distinguishing between words otherwise identical in appearance. Don't let that scare you, but they have thermos, which means hot, or thermos, which means being. Right? And yeah, this will just take extra memory power when we come to these words. A, me, I go, versus a me, I am. Okay. All right, letter C here. The acute may stand only on one of the last three syllables of a word. Okay, so we talked about this already. This, like an anthropos. Do I still have a good example here? Yeah, anthropos, right? Has three syllables. Get focus here for you, maybe. Okay, it's a little fuzzy. I'm gonna have to leave it like that for now. All right, so if anthropos, right, an accent is never going to go further away from the end of the word than three syllables. We talked about that. Anthropos actually only has three syllables, so, but you'll see that more even in long words. All right. So the acute may stand, we're in section C here, the acute may stand only on one of the last three syllables of a word, the circumflex only on one of the last two, and the grave only on the last. Okay, let's talk about that for a second. Let's see here. Let me see if they have an example here. All right, let's go with the example here, Amy. It's not the best example, but I'm going to use it. All right, we're going to use the Amy, I go. Okay, so we have the word Amy. This is, we want the word to go, so we're going to put a circumflex on the front. That's not a circumflex, that is a smooth breathing. So that means Amy, just not Amy, just Amy. And we're going to put a circumflex on it. Okay. So remember, this is long, right? So if we're going to break this up, we'll break it up right there. Okay, so Amy. So two-syllable word. But we have, okay, so Greek likes the number 3 when it comes to syllables. We have if we have a word written here, let's say anthropos again. Okay, we have the antepenult, we have the ultima, the penult, and then the antepenult, right? But when it comes to accent and the rhythm of words, Greek likes the number 3. And as far as where you can put that accent, it likes the feeling of 3. And what I'm referring to is more, or portions, right? So me, the iota here is 1. It's a short, that is, it's 1 more. It's 1 portion, right? The A, 2 vowels, diphthong, has 2, right? So we have 3 here, and to accommodate that feeling of 3 that Greek likes, we're going to put a circumflex here, which is an acute, followed by a grave, which we can do because it has 2 portions for those 2 accents, which are represented in the single symbol of a circumflex, right? And then within this short word here, we still have the feeling of 3 portions, even though technically we only have 2 syllables, right? So we have 1 syllable, 2 syllables, but we have the feeling of 3 portions because of this circumflex put here over this long vowel, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's go on and we will talk about, so we have the short vowel here, iota, 1, and then the 2 with the A. All right, so let's see here. Let's go with anthropos. All right, so now I talked earlier about how I knew to put the accents over this alpha here, right? So we have short more here, then we have this long throw, but then we're going to put the accent there, right? So we're still honoring the 3-syllable rule. Okay, 1, 2, 3, or counting from the rear, 1, 2, 3. So your ultima, penult, antepenult, last, second to last, third to last, right? So we have our short here. Now, if we were to change this, so this just means man. If we were to change this to anthropou, okay, this means of man. This is, we'll talk about this later, this ending change. This means of man. This is just man as a subject. This is him as a genitive, but we'll talk about that later. So this means of man, pertaining to man, right? But this is long because it's a diphthong, right? So it has 2 mores, right? This has 2 mores. This has still 1 more, right? So now that we've lengthened by the portions, we still have the same amount of syllables. We still have 1, 2, 3 syllables, but the length required, the amount of time required to pronounce the end of this word is longer than this, right? So we have 2 here, 1 here, and then we have the 1 at the beginning, right? So to maintain the proper feel for anthropou, that accent is going to come back here, okay, to the second to last syllable, but really it's within that 3rd more, right? So if you were to break each long syllable into mores, symbols, you do this, right? And this has 1, right? This has 2, that has 1, that has 1. Okay, so really you are putting the accent on this second section here. So then you still have 1, 2, 3. So it gives you the feeling of length of time to pronounce that word. You're still satisfying the Greek preference for that number 3, right? Whereas up here, treating this as just a syllable, you have 1, 2, 3. If that makes sense, right? So the length of time to pronounce this is about the same length of time you could say to pronounce this, right? And of course this whole together is going to be longer than this, right? That is the time it takes to pronounce it. I hope that makes sense. I hope that is helpful to you. Again, put questions in the comments if you'd like more clarity on that. Okay, so let's talk about. All right, let's go to page 27. Okay, and we will go to section E here. All right, let's read D first. The circumflex may stand only on a long vowel or a diphthong. We talked about that, right? Therefore, so long vowel has two mores or two portions, like omega, right? And then a diphthong, of course, has two mores because it's combined of two short vowels. So a short and short equals one long vowel, which is still two mores, right? So a long vowel like omega or eta are equal in the duration of time to pronounce them as a diphthong, right? Because they all have two portions each. All right, therefore, if a vowel has a circumflex accent, no other mark is needed to show that the vowel is long. All right, here we have examples here. Upsilon, remember, can be long or short. Here we know it's long because it has a circumflex over it. And to pronounce the tone change in a circumflex, which is basically an acute and a grave put together, it has to be twice as long. So we know upsilon here requires longer to pronounce it, so we know it's long because it has that circumflex over it, right? That's the Greek spelling of Cyrus. But then we have kuru of Cyrus, right? Okay. And now, why are they doing, and again, this is a good example as to why, or it shows how the Greeks like the number 3 when it comes to their syllables and the duration of time. So if we have one more here with a short omicron, we're going to stress this upsilon and make it long so that we have two mores here. So two portions here with the upsilon and one with the omicron gives you 3, right? All right, so if we look at kuru, this means of Cyrus. So we saw the omicron, upsilon on anthropu of man. Now we have of Cyrus. So that is 2 mores, right? And then here, they are marking this as long with the macron there, but they're putting the acute on it rather than a circumflex, right? So they're putting that acute circumflex, or that acute mark, on the second more of that upsilon. So that's still going to put us, so if we have 2 mores here and 2 mores here, they're putting that acute on that second more, right? If that makes sense. And then so we're still sticking to the concept of 3, right? And we have 2 here and then 1 here, so we have 3, if that makes sense. All right, let's go on to letter E. So an accented antepenal takes the acute, but it must not have an accent if the last syllable is long by nature or ends MC or xi or psi. All right, so we talked about this already with anthropos versus anthropou, right? So short omicron here is going to allow that accent to go further out to the word up to 3 syllables to give a feeling of the 3 sections there, right? When you have a long syllable on the end, that lengthens the time necessary to pronounce this word. So you're not going to let that accent go out here because you want to maintain that sense of 3 of conclusion towards the end of the word, right? So you're going to accent that second more on omicron, and then that's going to give you 1, 2, 3, right? Because there's 2 mores here. Right? Let me write that a little better. So you have more, 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 more. So you have 3. Okay. So let's look at F. An accented penult takes the circumflex if it is long by nature and the last syllable is short. Okay. Otherwise the acute. All right. And they give the word here doron, gift, but doru, of a gift. Okay. So again, you have 2 mores here and a single more on. So long omega, short omicron. Right. So if I were to put an acute on this omega, and you just mark that second one, that second more on the omega, that would just give me two portions or two mores, which would sound weird and feel weird to the Greek speaker. So we're going to put a circumflex to draw on this extra more on this omega. So then we have 1, 2, and 3 more. We say doro, right? So it gives it the right rhythm, the right rhythmic feel for the Greek ear. Here we have our diphthong u, so it's 2 mores there. So I have 2 mores on the omega, but we don't want to transgress the number 3 or go above it, so we are going to just put an acute there to stress the second more, and then we're going to maintain that sense of 3. Okay? So the short vowel on the end makes this into a circumflex over a long vowel because it wants to lengthen itself basically to the number 3. Here we already have 2 mores at the end of the word, so we only need 1 more. So we're going to put an acute there to diminish the length of the omega, if that makes sense. Right? It's still long, but we're putting an acute mark on it, which takes less time to pronounce than a circumflex. Okay. All right, let's look at G. Letter G. An accented ultima, if short, takes the acute. If long, the acute or the circumflex. Okay, so the ultima is just the last syllable. So potamos, river, we have an acute accent. Short, 1 more can only take an acute. Okay, or a grave, but we'll talk about that later. Potamon of the rivers is a circumflex, right? Okay, so that is going to be 2 mores are available there, so you have a circumflex taking advantage of those 2 mores to pronounce itself, two-tone change, up and then down, all in one vowel because it's long. 2 mores, 2 portions. All right, and then potamus, now this is accusative plural, it means direct object in plural. It means rivers, and that has an acute on it. Okay, and that is just typical of that particular ending. Okay, let's go to letter H. An ultima that normally has an acute changes the acute to the grave, because you remember acute has 1 more and a grave has 1 more, right? When another word immediately follows without intervening pronunciation, or punctuation. For example, potamos has an acute, okay? No word following after it, so potamos, right? So potamos. But potamos, kalos, so you have the grave there because kalos is meant to be taken with pothamos as the beautiful river, right? So in Greek, the adjective often comes after the noun, right? So you have a word following pothamos, therefore that acute is going to go to a grave. So instead of an ascending tone on os, like here, os, it's going to be os. Os, kalos, and then it goes back up on os here, okay? All right, letter I, a proclitic. The word proclitic, again, to demystify the magic words here. Proclitic just means to lean forward. And you'll see what I mean by that, what that means. A proclitic is a monosyllable that has no accent and is pronounced with the word that follows. So, for example, you have here ho, that'd be rough breathing, right? Like the letter C above O, omicron. Ho, anthropos. Ho, anthropos, right? So that is just, it's actually the definite article, the man, but it's treated as part of anthropos. And this makes sense because if the accents denote change in tone, you need something from it to change from, right? So here on anthropos, you know this is acute, that is the tone is up, and you can tell it's up because you come back down for the omega, and omicron. So anthropos, right? Anthropos. If you just have a single letter like O, there's no reference point to know what that tone is to put an accent on it. So you can't put an accent on it. So you're just going to join it with the next word, right? So it's going to be ho anthropos, right? If that makes sense, right? So an enclitic, so we have leaning forward. Enclitic just means to lean on, right? And you could say lean back. It doesn't actually mean lean back, just means to lean in, lean on. But it means lean back because it's the word that comes after. So proclitic is like ho comes before anthropos, so it's proclitic. Don't get bogged down with these terms. Leaning, so it leans forward, it joins that word. An enclitic leans back, that is, it comes after, right? So an enclitic is a word that is pronounced with the preceding word and usually lacks an accent of its own. For example, anthropoi te. Now this is interesting here because the accent that would have been on te is being transferred to anthropoi, right? So this is plural men. And, like, so they give the example here, hominesque in Latin, and the men, so right, so it's plural. But that te is an enclitic because it's being read as with anthropoi, right? So it looks like anthropoi has two accents, but really it's just stealing that accent from the te. All right, and we'll talk about that more, as you can see here in section 95. All right, let's look at section 6 here. This is just going to be just a general broad overview. I'm not going to go into detail on this. Inflection means to bend something, right? So like we were talking about with anthropos, here we go. Let's get this up here. So we went from anthropos to anthropou. So the inflection or the bending is happening at the end of the word, from os to u. And this changes the word from a subject to basically an indirect object, right? The man does something of the man, right? Of belonging to the man, right? The son of the man, right? So this is inflection. It's bending the ending to change its function in the grammar. In English, we just have word order to show that, and we use a lot of prepositions, right? In Greek, they change the endings to change how it functions in the grammar, all right? So Greek is a highly inflected language. It has 3 genders, which is not entirely true. Let me explain what I mean. There are only 2 genders, right? You have masculine, and then you have feminine. Neuter, we call it a gender, but it is basically genderless. Neuter is a Latin word, which means nay, which means not, and then uter means either. So either is a reference to 2, that is namely masculine and feminine. So if a word is neutered, it has neither masculine nor feminine gender. It is neutered, right? Anyway, it seems like a technical point, but it does help you think about Greek in the correct way. So yeah, there are 3 what we call genders, but technically there's just 2 masculine, feminine, and then you have the neutered words, nouns that are neither masculine nor feminine. There are 3 numbers, and what I mean by numbers is just how many people, how many subjects, how many objects, how many people are doing something, right? Let's see here. The boy was throwing a ball versus the boys were throwing a ball. So you have a singular boy, so the number of that would be singular, and then you have the boys, the plural, 2 or more. That number, that subject would be plural. Dual, you will, I don't know that we're even going to cover that in this in this book. Dual is almost never used, and you'll usually just see it in poetry. So don't worry about the dual. Just focus on singular and plural, and don't let the dual scare you. All right, and there are 3 declensions. This will make more sense what a declension is, okay? So this is the Omicron, the beginning of the Omicron declension. If you just cover up, you have os, u. Then you're going to have, I'm not going to go through it all, but then you have o, and then you have, might as well, then you have on, right? So that is the singular part of the Omicron declension. And declension just means like going down in an order of importance, right? So those are the inflection endings just listed out there. So that's the singular, os, u, o, and then on. So I don't want to drown you in information here, but you have the nominative, the genitive, the dative, and then the accusative. So you have the subject, direct object, and then these genitive and dative, we can regard them as indirect objects for the sake of argument. All right, so those are declensions, the descending order, right, of importance of inflections. And then we call them by their alpha declension, which is your feminine words, and then your Omicron declensions, which are going to be your masculine, and then your neutered words, right? Let's see here. The Greek verb has, and then consonant declensions. We'll get to those later on. We'll learn those last. Those are a little more complicated, but we will get to it in time. All right, going on. The Greek verb has 3 voices: active, middle, and passive. So in English, we are familiar with active verbs, right? The boy hit the ball. That's active. The subject hit the direct object, right? Passive in English is the boy is hit or was hit. That is, the boy is still the subject, but he's passive now. So the verb hit, we use the helping word was hit by the ball, right? That's a passive. Was hit is passive. The boy hit there is active. And Greek has a very interesting voice for verbs, is called the middle. And the best example I can think of is if you use more archaic English and say something like, the ship weathered the storm, right? So the storm is happening to the ship, to the boat. The weather, the storm, is hitting the ship, but the ship is the subject, right? The ship is not hit by the storm or by the weather. The ship weathers the storm, right? So it's this middle between active. It's not active, it's not passive. It's the ship is doing something, you could say, on behalf of itself, that pertains to itself, right? So as the ship drives through the waves, even though it is actively moving forward, it is passively being assaulted by the waves, right? So it is doing something with the effect realized upon itself, if that makes sense. And that's in Greek, we call that the middle voice. All right. It's actually a very cool aspect of Greek that we lack in English. All right. Onward we go. 4 moods. This is, again, we're talking about verbs here. This all pertains to verbs. All right. So declensions, nouns. Declensions are nouns. And then the voice, mood, this is all verb stuff that we're talking about here. So active, middle, and passive voices for verbs. That is what's happening to the subject of this verb, right? And then you have 4 moods or modes. Mood comes from modes, right? You have indicative, which just shows that something is happening, right? Subjunctive, which has the feeling of something that ought to be done in the future. We'll cover that more when we get to it. Optative, again, something that could, would, might be done, would be done in the future. We don't talk about this a lot. In English, we come across the subjunctive, I believe, in expressions like Old English, like the hymn that says, "Be thou my vision." That could be construed as a subjunctive. It's it is an imperative, but it has the feeling of subjunctive because of the verb be there. All right. So we have indicative, subjunctive, optative, and imperative. Imperative is just a command, just a command. You're ordering something to be changed to something else. You're insisting that it be done. Open the door. That's imperative, right? All right, and then there are 7 tenses. Before we move on to that, modes. The most important thing that we'll learn right off the bat is indicative and imperative. So don't let subjunctive and optative scare you. The subjunctive and optative, they are a pain, but we will learn a lot of Greek before we get to those, so we will be prepared for those. So for now, we'll be learning indicative and imperative first. All right, 7 tenses for verbs. Okay, yeah, Greek has a lot of tenses. The word tense just comes from the Latin tempus, which means time, which may be a little misleading, not to get into too much detail here, but it is better to think of Greek verbs as, is the action complete? Is the action completed? Is the effect of the action still being felt, right? Which sometimes you can describe that as time, like the past, the future. But yeah, is the effect of the action, when was that felt? Is it still being felt, right? And so let's just go over the tenses. There's 7, right? We have present tense, just like in English, present is happening now, right? I am teaching Greek, present tense. Imperfect means that I was teaching lesson 1 last week. That is to say, I'm not doing it now, right? So I was doing it in the past. That action is not being felt now into the present, right? I mean, if you were watching it, in a way, I'm like reliving the past, but it's imperfect. I was teaching lesson 1 last week, but I'm not doing it now. I was doing it then, right? So present, imperfect, future, right? I will be teaching lesson 3 next week. Future. We have these in English, these concepts in English. Aorist is a Greek verb that we don't really have a equivalent in English. So aorist, aorist, means without stone, boundary stone. So without parameters. It's just, I had a professor tell me it's just like the Nike slogan, just do it. That's aorist, right? It is just done. It's just done. There's no real boundary as to where this verb stops and ends in time or effect. It's without boundaries. Aorist, right? It's without boundary stone. Perfect means something that started in the past, but the effects are still being felt now. So I have been teaching lesson 2 of Greek. I'm still doing it now. The effects are still happening now, right? Pluperfect. Pluperfect just means plus means more. So more perfect. We typically translate this in English as I had taught Latin last year, right? I had taught it. Okay. And then future perfect is I will have taught Latin this time next week, right? So those are the 7 tenses. We'll take those on slowly but surely. The present, future perfect, and future perfect are all called primary tenses. Again, don't get bogged down in the terminology here. All that means is that these tenses are all going to be built on the same, and this will make more sense when we actually look at verbs. They're all going to be built on the same framework. It's like if you have a chassis for a truck, a pickup truck, you can put a van on that same chassis, right? So you have a pickup truck and then you have a van, two different vehicles, but they're on the same chassis, right? So trying to think if there's another example. Yeah, they just have the same foundation of, they have the same roots that they work with, right? And that'll make more sense when we actually cover these tenses. And then you have imperfect, aorist, and pluperfect are called the secondary tenses because they are built on a secondary form of the verb, right? So primary versus secondary doesn't mean that secondary tenses are less important or even less frequent. In many texts, the aorist is the most common tense you'll see, even though it's called a secondary tense, right? So secondary just means that there's been some altering done to the chassis, if you will, the root of the word. The tenses are also divided into classes or systems according to their stem, right? Chassis, stem. Each system is composed of the tenses which have a common stem or chassis, right? If we're talking about vehicles. All right, so that is lesson number 2. And we talked about syllables, accents. Accents are probably one of the more difficult things to understand in Greek. So if it feels a little confusing right now, that's pretty typical, that's pretty normal. And I'll try to flesh this out more as we move forward in lessons because all this is cumulative, all this will build upon itself and you'll continue to see it, lesson after lesson. So it will become more familiar to you. And but with the mores and the portions per the syllable, I'm trying to give you a fundamental principle to work with that's rather than just memorizing words and syllables and where accents go, like anthropos versus anthropou. I want you to understand the system behind all that to reduce the amount of memorization that you have to do. So I hope I'm doing a good job with that. Again, if you have questions, go ahead and leave those in the comments below. Let's take a look at the homework assignment, the exercises here. So, okay, let's just read through these and I'll explain these real quick. Pronounce the Greek words. This is going to help you with the alphabet learning if you've not memorized the alphabet already. Pronounce the Greek words of sections Roman numeral 1 through 2, stressing each syllable that bears an accent. Then write it in English letters, okay? So let's go to 1 and 2 just to make sure. Okay, so there's the 2 on page 25, diphthongs. So they're, Crosby and Schaeffer, they're wanting you to just read through these words, okay? And then to transliterate, that is take the letters and take them across into English letters, right? So if we were to do that with, I'll give you an answer here. This is phi, no, so phi, no, menon, right? If we were to write that out in English letters, it would look like this. Phi, and you can dot the English I, and then no, men, on, okay? So if you can see that, so phi, no, me, and then non, okay? If you come across an omega, like that, to transcribe that into English, just use an O, but then just mark it as long. If you come across an epsilon, yeah, you just transliterate that as E. Now, if you come across eta, transliterate as E, but with a long mark over it. Okay. Otherwise, let's see here. Your alpha is just going to be A. It can sometimes be long, sometimes short. Don't get too bogged down with that right now. Iota can sometimes, it's just going to be an I, can sometimes be long, sometimes be short. And then upsilon, just a U, can sometimes be long, sometimes be short. Remember, if a vowel comes between two consonants, it is most likely going to be long if it's one of these vowels, right? Epsilon is always short. It can only ever be short. Okay, and let's see here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, and then yeah, Omicron, that's the one we're missing. So Omicron is only ever short. Okay, you don't have to put a short sign over Omicron. You don't need to do that. Just mark it if it's long, and if it's not long, we know it's short. Okay. So short, long, long, and then short. Epsilon is always short, and then alpha, iota, upsilon, short or long. Okay. So that's section 2, and then if you flip back, section 1 here, right? That's what they want you to do. So go through all these. And now I did this, I read through all these for you in the expanded lesson, the supplement lesson on Patreon. If you're a subscribed patron, I've done that for you. And I will post this as well for lesson 2 on Patreon for our subscribers there. Okay, so that's exercise letter A, right? Read through the words, pronounce the Greek words, stressing each syllable that bears an accent. Try to do the tone, ascending for acute, right? Acute, ascending, grave, descending, and then circumflex has both of those combined, goes up and then comes back down. So try to, don't stress about it, but try to incorporate the tone there as well. Keeping in mind the idea of the concept of mores. All right, letter B, write in Greek letters nemesis, asbestos, and so forth like that, right? So we're doing from Greek to English in exercise A. Now in B, we're going from English to Greek, right? So here, I'll help you out with 2 of these words. So nemesis is going to be nu, epsilon, mu, epsilon, sigma, iota, final form sigma. All right, all short. Diploma, they have a long mark over the O, so we're going to have delta, iota, p, lambda, not omicron. We need a long, we need a big, mega, so we're going to say omega, and then mu, and then alpha. Okay, and then let's do zone. Zone is how you pronounce this in Greek. So you have zeta. Now this is long, so you're going to have omega. Then you have a nu. Now you have a long e. So the long e, if you remember, is going to represent eta. Right, so long e goes back to eta. All right, so write those out in Greek. And again, I'll post all the answers to these on Patreon. And then letter C, accents the penult. Okay, so you have the ultima, then you have the penult, then you have the antepenult. So you have the last, second to last, and then basically before the second to the last, right? So they want us to accent the penult. So here, you're going to put an accent on the second to last syllable of each word. Some of these words only have 2 syllables, right? All right, musai. Okay, and then remember, I and oi are treated as short at the end of a word, right? Okay. And then remember, Greek likes to have the understanding of three. Okay. So let me help you out here. Just a couple examples. So we're going to accent the second to last syllable, right? 1, 2, 3. Penalt. This is Socrates, if you didn't recognize it, Socrates. All right, so you have eta, which is long, so there's 2 mores there, right? And then you have alpha, which is short, 1 more, right? Which is fine, because now we have 1, 2, and 3. So we're going to put acute. We cannot put a circumflex on a short vowel, and we cannot put a grave in the middle of a word. A grave can only be on the last syllable of the word, right? If it's being followed by another word. So only an acute can go here, and we have satisfied the Greek ear to have 3 mores here, even though we only have 2 syllables, so we still have 3 mores, okay? All right, musa, this is the word for muse. This is the inspirational ladies for Homer. So we have alpha here, which is short because it's not marked as long. So we have 1 more, and then 2 mores. Now we got to satisfy the Greek ear, so we got to have 3 mores here. So we're going to incorporate both mores on this diphthong by doing a circumflex. Musa. Okay. And let's see here. Now, I know I'm doing a lot of this for you, but that's fine. Graphoi. They say it's optative mood. Remember, it's always short, except an optative. That's why they put that there. So we're going to treat this as long. Typically, that would have been short, but it's optative, right? So we have double more, and then we have a single more, right? So again, the Greek ear is happy because we have 1, 2, and 3. We can only put an acute on a 1 more, short vowel, right? Let's see here. Let's do this one. Konoi. Now this is a noun, so that we're going to treat that as 1 more because it's short. I, alpha iota, and oi, omicron iota, is short at the end of a word, except in oikoi and except in the optative mood, right? So here we have konoi, so we have, so it is short, so it's 1 more, and then omega, 2 mores, so we have 1, 2, and 3, and to incorporate that extra more there, we're going to put a circumflex over the omega, right? And let's see. All right, I'll let you do the rest on that. I don't want to steal all your thunder. All right, let's look at D. Mark the length of the ultima. Yeah, mark the length. Is it short or is it long? And the way we're going to figure this out is by looking at what the accent looks like, right? So Genesis, I don't know if my book had a typo or not, but there was no accent mark. If your book has no accent mark, it goes over the first epsilon, or the antepenult epsilon, right? So that tells me that this iota is short. We'll mark it as short. Because we have 1 more, 2 mores, 3 mores. Because short, short, short. If that iota was long, well, normally it'd be marked, but if it was long, we'd have 2 mores, and then 1 more, and then the accent would be here. Right? So if this were long, it would have 2, 1, and then together on that second to last epsilon, you would have an accent mark. Does that make sense? So let's pretend. This is incorrect, but let me assume that that's long, right? Then you would have 2 mores, then 1 more for the epsilon, because epsilon is always short. So then that accent would have to go back to that epsilon there to satisfy the Greek here for 3 mores. But get my eraser going here. But because that mark is on the epsilon there, we know that these are only one more a piece, if that makes sense. Okay. Here you see omega has two mores, 1, 2. Another omega has two mores, so we're just going to use that second more on the omega here with an acute, and together we'll have 3 mores. Right? So we have 1, 2, 1, 2. That's just 1. And then that acute, we're going to just include these 3. Okay, and I'll leave the rest for you. But that is the lesson for today. Quite a bit longer than last time. An hour and 45 minutes. All right. So thank you for watching. I'll go over the homework again for patrons over at Patreon. The link is in the About section on this channel, and in the description box below. So take a look at that. It's $10 a month if you like help with the homework. And please like, subscribe, share. Be sure to leave comments, questions, and suggestions in the box below, and I'll try to respond to those. And thank you for joining me again today, and I hope to see you again next week for lesson 3, where we will get into chapter 1. They call it lesson 1, but we will be chapter 1, which will be our 3rd lesson. But we'll actually get into the heart of the book now and actually get into some real Greek grammar, which will be fun. So join me for that next week. And again, thanks for stopping by today and hanging in there till the very end. All right. Thank you. Bye now.